For many Singaporeans, a visit to the Housing and Development Board, the institution responsible for the country's public housing, is seen as a rite of passage. And that's because public housing flats are considered the housing of choice for most citizens. 3 times a year, Singapore's Housing and Development Board launches new BTO or built-to-order projects for sale. But you'll see in this recent sales exercise, almost every room type in every project is oversubscribed. Some by as many as 10 times. And if you think demand for this launch was a one-off, think again.
Since 2010, the applications have always been above or higher than the supply.
Given that the flats are highly subsidized, demand tends to be much higher. And if the demand is too high, then balloting will come in.
It's awful.
Which is why getting a BTO flat can feel like winning the lottery. It's even worth a shout out at the nation's birthday bash.
I'm very grateful for HDB for giving me a BTO queue number.
So, how is it decided who gets a flat and when they get it?
I mean, inherent in any balloting system, there's a bit of luck, right?
We reveal the secrets behind the complex balloting system and discover how this small nation meets its people's massive demand for quality public housing. This nondescript room on the 4th floor of HDB is where all the action happens. Here, sophisticated algorithms determine whether you get your choice flat. But to even enter the draw, these are some of the criteria you'd have to meet.
Be a Singapore citizen.
You have to be married.
Singles have to be above 35.
There is an income cap.
Think of this as how today's balloting system works. Once you apply, your application, that's this ball here, joins others vying for the same town and flat type. But not everyone gets an equal chance. For a start, first-timer families get to enter their name multiple times, giving them better odds of being picked. They start off with 2 chances and get another if they're a married couple under 40 or have young children. If they've been unsuccessful in past ballots for standard flats, that's flats in less desirable areas, they get more chances, with some groups getting up to 5. Applicants who qualify are sorted into the numerous priority schemes, where they will compete with others in their scheme for an allotment of queue numbers.
There is a married child priority scheme, the family and parenthood priority scheme, the multi-generation priority scheme, the third child priority scheme, the seniors priority scheme. There's also the assist for second-timers who are divorcees or widowed persons, and the tenants priority scheme, which is for resettlement, relocation. So public housing in Singapore is not just like the roof over one's head. We actually use public housing to also achieve a lot of social objectives. For example, supporting and facilitating parenthood, and also supporting mutual care and support within families.
Now is the October sales launch. We will be checking whether the applicants are eligible for the priority scheme that they applied for. This applicant applied for the married child priority scheme. This is actually the most common priority scheme that our applicants apply for. The criteria is the parent's address must be within 4 kilometers from the flat they applied for. We have this system to actually check the distance. We will do ownership check. Sometimes they indicate this parent is staying at this address, right? But this address might belong to their relative. So we will actually find out further from there.
So it sounds like you're an investigator.
In a way, yes. On average, right, every day, one of us would have to check about 50 cases. Usually, we will take probably about 4 to 6 weeks. So once after all the checks are done, right, we will actually go into the balloting.
And there's a reason why we need an algorithm to do all that work. Which priority schemes apply and the exact percentage set aside for each group differs depending on the project's classification and the flat type.
So for example, 770 is actually for Bukit Batok 4-room flat. 40% of the flats here are actually set aside for the family parenthood priority schemes for first-timers. Married child priority scheme first-timers, 30%. Married child priority scheme second-timer, 3%.
In the first round of shortlisting, the algorithm randomly selects applicants from the priority scheme pools. If you are picked, you don't get a flat just yet, but you are guaranteed a queue number. Those who don't get picked get to try again in the public scheme, along with everyone else competing for the remaining allotment of queue numbers. Those who are selected here join applicants shortlisted in the first round. They form the final shortlist.
So once we actually have the final shortlist, the computer actually randomly assigns the queue position for their flat selection.
That means those who are shortlisted under both the priority and public schemes get an equal chance to get a good queue number.
Smaller queue number means that you are able to actually come down to select the flat earlier.
We wanted to know who are the lucky few who got first picking. So, we asked you for help. More than 20 of you responded. 2 of you even got the elusive #1 spot, which means they got to pick any unit of the chosen flat type in the entire town.
Yeah, so if let's say there are 100 units available, we can issue up to 200 queue numbers. The reason why we do so is because some applicants decide to drop out along the way.
If there are still flats available when your queue number is up, you'll get an appointment to come here.
So when they come here for appointment, right, if you go to the atrium, you see those TV screens that shows the units available for each block. Before they are called the counter, they will have to monitor whether the flats are still available and the colour change. It's quite stressful sometimes. So if they have shortlisted the 10 units, maybe on the day when they come, some flats would have been taken up and then they may have to look for their next available option.
And your options shrink even more if the ethnic quota for your race has already been filled in that desired block.
So the Ethnic Integration Policy, or EIP, is actually a long-standing policy. We introduced it since 1989, and the aim is to ensure that all our towns and estates and neighbourhoods are inclusive and diverse. So how it works is that we kept the proportion of each ethnic group by block as well as by neighbourhood.
This cap is set so that each neighbourhood is representative of Singapore's racial demographics.
The balloting system, we think, is the fair and most efficient way of allocating flats. Based on our data, for those applying for the not as popular estates, typically they'll be successful within 3 tries of getting a flat. I mean, inherent in any balloting system, there's a bit of luck, right?
Do people ever come up to you and ask you why I never get my flat?
Yeah, all the time.
Is awful.
The minute we issue the ballot results, right, we'll be bombarded with a lot of letters saying, why am I unsuccessful and all that. So our job is to really to explain the system as a balloting system. Somebody has to be at the top of the queue, somebody has to be at the bottom of the queue. So they may not like the answer, but I suppose we just have to explain. And again, we let them know of the options available. Looking for flats with a bigger supply, with lower application rates, and there's always the resale market that they can turn to.
Today's version of the balloting system actually only came about in 2001. For a period before that, all it took was 1 try to get your flat guaranteed.
Good morning, everybody. I am Pek Shan. Thank you for joining me for this Jurong West orientation tour. When you board a bus, you would have received this one map. This morning we're going to start off our tour at Yuanzhou Road, and that's number 46 on the map.
Pek Shang is bringing us on a tour that she used to do years ago as part of HDB's marketing team.
On the left, we have the Jurong Lake Gardens. The last time I gave this tour, more than 20 years ago, it didn't even exist.
I joined Housing Development Board in 1999 amidst an unprecedented challenge. Would you believe it? Like, there was a point in time that we actually had thousands of new unsold flats in Singapore, and they were all completed on the ground, vacant, waiting for buyers. So that was about 2 years after the Asian financial crisis.
Singapore shares fell to a new 4-year low.
A cloudy day for the regional stock markets too. Stocks and currencies continue to plunge to record lows.
The government is reviewing its property market policies, taking into account the regional economic uncertainties. Singapore is now technically in a recession, the first time since 1985.
There were a lot of people who lost their jobs. There was a lot of uncertainty, and they didn't know whether they can afford to buy a flat. They just decided to leave the queue. So at that point in time, we had 31,000 unsold flats, and we had to find a way to market them. So we went all out, I would say, to sell all these flats. You name it, we have done it. Advertisements, road shows, show flats, bus tours. We created the fund map to highlight some of the facilities and amenities to potential flat buyers. We had a job to do. It was a big one, and I didn't expect myself to be a tour guide. The pressure is immense. The amount of resources that has gone in, to build and to hold these unsold flats. We have to pay the service and conservancy fees by HDB. We also have to spruce up and maintain these unsold units. It is very costly to the government as well as the taxpayers. Towns with unsold flats like Jurong West, Punggol and Sengkang, we had a sales office on site. People can literally just walk in, book a flat, and collect keys in like a matter of weeks.
Many flat applicants who bought their flats just before the Asian financial crisis saw a negative equity. In other words, the values of their flats were lower than their outstanding loan.
It took us about 5 years to clear the unsold flats. So after AFC, we thought we should change the way that we allocate the flats.
Before the current build-to-order or BTO system, HDB had the RFS, or Registration for Flat system.
Back then, flats were built before buyers even booked them. And when you got your flat was based simply on queue position.
Under the RFS, flat buyers would join a queue for a specific zone and flat type.
But here's a catch. These would be in what was previously known as non-mature or less developed areas in these 3 zones, where most new flats were built.
The flat applicants couldn't know the exact location of their flats, the prices, the flat design, and the completion date until they are invited to select a flat. For example, flat buyers indicated their interest to live in the West Zone could be offered a flat in Jurong West or Choa Chu Kang, which are quite far apart. The RFS worked well as the buyers had more certainty in terms of getting a flat. It's just a matter of time when their queues will be due. But after the Asian financial crisis, the queue for new flats dissipated.
So in 2001, we piloted the build-to-order system. This is the brochure that you see that we had that year.
Under the BTO system, HDB will proceed to construct the flats only when at least 70% of the flats in the project have been taken up. Flat applicants can choose to apply for a project at the location of their choice.
So the first version of Singapore's public housing allocation system allowed you to pick your estate on a first-come, first-served basis. But your exact unit was left to chance. By the 1990s, most of the nation had become homeowners, and many of those applying were looking to upgrade. So, the registration for flat system was created with a separate queue to prioritize first-time buyers. But wait times and your exact neighborhood were unpredictable. Finally, the BTO system allows buyers to plan ahead and choose their location and unit. But with more choice comes more competition for coveted areas, and therefore less certainty of getting the flat you want.
This built-to-order system faced some difficulty when the market picked up very quickly in 2010. Economic growth, low interest rate had actually driven the demands up more than supply. Supply not able to catch up.
It was said later in Parliament that before 2008, first-timer families could book a BTO flat in a non-mature estate within 3 applications. By 2010, this had risen to 7 attempts.
So in 2010 and 2011, the government decided to actually tweak the system.
In the past, so you will only build when there is 70% take-up, but that is no longer the case. So our projects will start construction when they are ready. How early construction can start depends on various factors such as the amount of preparation work required to ready a site for development, whether a site needs engagement of stakeholders.
These are the number of flats launched after the BTO system was fully implemented. It ranged between 1,400 flats in 2002 to about 9,000 flats in 2009. Since ramping up flat supply in 2010, the HDB has launched around 15,000 to 27,000 BTO units a year, which has narrowed the supply-demand gap and brought the number of tries needed back down to 3.
BTO demand had come down quite significantly from the highs of 2013, to the extent that we could do a few things. One was to move to allow singles to buy BTO. And we were confident in 2018 to announce the rollout of shorter waiting time flats. Flats where the waiting time would be 3 years and less. Of course, COVID, all of that unravelled.
Top story, the first confirmed case of the Wuhan virus here in Singapore. It's a 66-year-old Chinese national from Wuhan.
Within a few days, the first cases were already detected in Singapore.
Singapore has seen its first local transmissions of the coronavirus.
Case 108 is a 34.
Total number of cases here now to 200.
The first blow was when Malaysia imposed the MCO, the Movement Control Order. And the MCO was Malaysia's way of limiting movement between the borders so that they will minimize infection spread within Malaysia.
So Singapore, we are very small and we don't have a lot of space to produce everything ourselves. So we have to rely on imports of materials and also on manpower from overseas.
For BTO projects, during the construction of the superstructure, the building itself, most of the components like precast come from Malaysia.
It meant that all these precast components cannot be brought into Singapore.
Without a precast component, you cannot continue the building works.
Well, the immediate thought is, what's the plan B?
HDB immediately activated its contractors to find out how much supply they had. MTI, of course, at that point had its border group that was working with their counterpart.
We tried to approach the Malaysians to allow an exception for these precast units to be brought into Singapore. And fortunately, the Ministry of Transport in Malaysia subsequently said that they will allow trucks to come in through the causeway from the 27th of March to the 29th of March. So we scrambled whatever we could with the manufacturers in Malaysia, and we brought in 300 truckloads of precast components.
It wasn't just MCO. The pandemic basically shut global supply chains down.
So for construction projects, most of the construction materials and construction accessories are imported from Malaysia, from China, and other countries around ASEAN.
So, we are trying to solve the supply of the logistics. We were not expecting to experience dormitory being locked down.
Singapore confirms another 35 new cases of COVID-19 today. Construction firms here in Singapore are expecting further delays to projects after a recent surge in COVID-19 cases in the dormitories.
The workers in the dormitories were locked down and essentially no work was done or could be done.
Immediate thought was, wow, the impact on construction would be significant because we are very reliant on our guest workers to build in Singapore. Can we continue to build? Can we deliver public housing?
The number of new cases daily has begun to rise. We will therefore impose significantly stricter measures. This is like a circuit breaker.
The next blow was the circuit breaker. BTO projects all had to stop work on that day. Even with the circuit breaker, clusters of infection were breaking out in the worker dorms. And the worker dorms housed thousands of workers.
The key focus of all the government agencies were on how to ensure we contain the situation so that you don't flood the public health system with outbreak after outbreaks. We know there will be delays, but you have to focus on what's important at that point.
It was certainly not the decision that was made lightly because we've never shut down the entire construction sector in this scale before. We knew the enormity of the decision, the seriousness of the impact. We had to do the unthinkable because lives came first.
Construction ground to a halt. But at the same time, HDB was seeing a surge in demand. Application rates for new homes were soaring to a new high. From 54,000 in 2019 to almost 1.7 times more at 91,000 in 2020.
During COVID, BTO demand shot up dramatically for a number of reasons. It was fear. People were worried, so many delays, construction halted, can I get a flat? Better apply. People who would normally have waited some time before they applied all front-loaded the applications to say, don't know whether can get later, better apply now. And then of course during COVID people felt that, well, all these concerns about health, about being too cramped, when previously they didn't need to have housing, now wanted also to have housing. So all of this led to a very sharp spike in BTO applications at the start of COVID, and it persisted for some time.
Construction has restarted with the gradual lifting of circuit breaker measures, which stopped all work about 4 months ago.
Of course, we were quite relieved that work could start. But it's not quite back to normal because even though some of the Malaysian workers could start to come in, there weren't many. Because COVID was still ongoing, they'd rather stay with their families, right?
So a lot of work was carried out at a very low, slow pace. You having maybe 30% of your original workforce, and once you have one worker that is diagnosed with COVID, again the whole site gets locked down.
During COVID, we have two effects. Having supply impacted, having more demand for housing to accommodate. We have to catch up even more.
We have to ramp up our BTO supply very significantly and very quickly, from about 17,000 in 2021 to like a 35% increase to around 23,000 annually from 2022 and 2023. And this was no mean feat. So I think it was a lot of stress when you have to ramp up the building supply and you have to deal with all these delays in the BTO project's completion.
I joined the government towards the end of July, early August of 2020. The atmosphere within the Manpower Ministry was actually quite tense, obviously because of the cluster that is ongoing within the dormitories. Before COVID in 2019, the number of migrant workers in construction was close to 300,000. During COVID itself, it dropped to about 230,000. So there was a drop of 20%.
Well, I think by now we realize that the delays are likely to mount to 6 to 9 months. And the implications, of course, is that many of my flat owners will not be able to take possession of their flats. They will be impacted in their planning, whether it's a marriage or trying to find alternative accommodation.
I was posted to HDB as CEO on the 26th of Feb 2021. That was a year into COVID. And all of Singapore, and I think many of the agencies were thinking about when we will emerge from COVID. Little did I know that COVID will continue to stay with HDB and our building program will still be affected by COVID 4 years hence.
All in all, 92 housing projects and more than 71,000 flat buyers were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic delays.
The final 2 HDB projects delayed due to the pandemic have been completed.
We're here at Punggol Point Cove. Now, for many of us, COVID would have been some years ago, but this is actually long COVID for the construction sector. Unprecedented work closures, impact to supply chain, impact to work processes, shortage of manpower, escalating costs. It's been a very long journey.
Pre-COVID, we never delivered projects late. We just don't. It could be on time or could be a couple of months early, but never late. So COVID was totally unprecedented. I think there are many lessons learned from COVID.
We are here now at Tengah. We are trialing a lot of new and advanced technologies here, and some of these technologies actually we have never used it on building public housing before. So this is really the first. Now, post-COVID, we realized that we have to move towards solutions on site whereby we do not rely so much on foreign manpower. As you can see, the autonomous tower crane is lifting the modules. Traditionally, this whole hoisting process will be done by the tower crane operator in tandem with people on the ground through walkie-talkie communication. But with the autonomous tower crane, by pressing the start button, we are able to have this module be delivered to the accurate site position in the shortest path possible. So as it approaches the correct location of where the module should be, the sky adjuster can be used to orientate the position of the module precisely. This is more productive as opposed to the traditional means of using manual rope guidance.
Reducing reliance on manpower is just one small pivot. There's also a need to reduce dependence on overseas precast construction. This is a typical 4-room public housing flat in Singapore. Made up of 3 bedrooms, a living room, 2 toilets, and a kitchen. Since the 1980s, the majority of our homes are actually made up of modular parts like these. Precast technology is what has helped this small country build big. But there's a catch.
Using precast technologies, we need large space for the production facilities. We also need large space for the storage of the precast component.
A lot of these components are made in Malaysia, where space is abundant.
We are in a precast plant in Senai. This plant occupies a land area of 36 hectares. It is one of the biggest precast plants in Malaysia, approved to supply precast components to HDB projects. So once the precast component is produced, they will be placed onto the trailer and then it will be transported across the causeway into Singapore. Every day we see around 130 trailers bringing precast component back to Singapore.
The Malaysia-Singapore border lockdown during the pandemic choked off the precast supply. It was a key reason construction could not proceed.
We had more workers than work because the materials were not coming, so there were no installation. We now have implemented in our contracts a certain local component, how much production should be done locally. So that's in place and that will stand us in better stead in terms of the precast supply for our projects going forward.
There are 21 precast plants in Singapore supplying to HDB. This is the newest plant, and it started operations in July 2023 after the pandemic. It's mostly automated and produces walls, toilets, and bomb shelters meant to protect you in wartime emergencies. To overcome the limited space, modular parts are stored on these specially designed racks. This plant produces precast components for up to 2,500 flat units every year. But since Singapore still isn't large enough to contain all the needed precast work, the construction industry has started to explore new ways to build.
This room that I'm in now is a 3D printed component.
This was printed using the largest 3D concrete printer in Southeast Asia. What would usually take around 4 to 6 weeks to precast only took the printer 13 hours. And together with the installation of the flooring, windows and doors, this room was completed in just 6 days.
The advantage of having 3D printer is that it could come in to help us to address the shortage of labor. When it comes to precast components, the workers are actually needed to help us with precast mold fabrication. With 3D printer, we are able to print the component as long as the designs are feasible to be printed. And this actually helps to save time, save labor. So far, we have been printing landscape benches at Bidadari. We also printed certain walls of the childcare center at Tengah. In fact, this chair that I'm sitting on, it took about 30 minutes to print the whole thing. And I'm impressed because we actually took the design from CNA and we printed out this whole thing in just half an hour. And so this actually opens up a lot of possibility. In time to come, we hope that we could print as many components as possible. But of course, all this takes time. For example, understanding whether the structural integrity of the room, is it suitable given Singapore's climate? So these are things that we are still work in progress.
Meanwhile, in the nearer term, HDB will be launching more than 50,000 flats between 2025 and 2027. They hope that this will narrow the gap between demand and supply.
We will press on. This high tempo will continue, and by about 2025, we expect to have about 150 BTO projects going on at the same time. So we are already building aggressively and at large scale. Fiscal resources, foreign manpower, and construction capacity are not without their limits.
In time to come, when we have stabilized the demand-supply equation and stabilized the market, and if we have enough flats, we will consider how we can open up and allow more access for other segments, especially for singles. We have made one move recently, which was to allow singles to buy flats across different types, not just standard, but also plus and prime. And we will consider what other moves we can make for singles down the road. But for now, we still don't have enough supply to meet the existing demand for existing groups. And therefore, we are unable to open up eligibility of HDB flats to new groups or to widen the eligibility.
Earlier, you saw how oversubscribed BTO projects can be. These are the application rates for first-timers. But it's even worse for second-timers and singles.
Second-timer families and the singles, the amount that being allocated to them is much smaller, and for a good reason. First-timer has a greater need, especially if they have children. Then, of course, when you think about for the flexi 2 hour, the elderly generally they need it much more urgently than the singles. And that is why I think when the government come out with policies, it's always trying to address the needs. So there definitely be segments that will feel left out. Right.
Much as I would like to meet the housing aspirations of every Singaporean, the fact is we have very limited land resource.
If everybody needs to get a flat now, today, and we open it for every single group, there are some physical trade-offs. You may have less space for playgrounds, open space, parks. Blocks may have to be closer. Smaller unit sizes may have to be considered. So we do have to prioritize. Can't please everyone at once.
Well, I'm here to kayak around Marina Bay with some of the Canoe Federation athletes.
Good morning.
just very therapeutic. You're in touch with nature, but also able to see Singapore from a different perspective. There are not many places in the world like us. It's an island city-state, very tight land use pressures. For many comparable cities, they have large hinterlands. For us, a lot of the things that the city needs to function, like power plants, incineration plants, military bases, airports, seaports, all of these have to be within the confines of the city and just out of necessity. About 11% of our land is set aside for transport. Industry, almost around 12%, just under 10% for green spaces, and then everything else. 14% of our land is set aside for housing.
This is Singapore today. Blue represents the existing public housing areas. As of 2019, that amounts to 8% of land set aside for housing. There are over 1.1 million flats here, catering to nearly 80% of the resident population. And these are the sites where more HDB flats will be built in the future. They are either categorized as brownfields or greenfields. Brownfield sites are previously occupied sites. In land-scarce Singapore, recycling land is inevitable. It could mean turning what used to be a school, field, and even old public housing into new blocks of flats.
For new BTO projects that is built on brownfield, we found interesting challenges like existing piles left behind from the previous project.
So the piles are very solid foundation to support the weight of the building as it goes up.
And we have to then move our house to a new position, and that will require new design consideration, approval, and that again will impact construction period up to 2-3 months. Most of the time we don't remove the old piles because to remove the old piles, it takes time and it takes a lot of money.
And it's not only brownfield sites that are challenging. These are greenfield sites, which are underdeveloped tracts of land full of vegetation and wildlife. And they present a different kind of difficulty.
We are now on the way to a EIA site. EIA stands for Environmental Impact Assessment. They are normally conducted for greenfield sites that are very near to ecologically sensitive areas. Consultants are actually tagging all the vegetations of conservation status, large trees. So other than vegetations, they will work around this transect to survey all the fauna, so that includes birds, mammals, bats, butterflies, amphibians, reptiles. Sometimes they also need to mount terrestrial camera traps to track animal movements at night to make sure that it's very comprehensive.
We are now at a potential public housing project site that hasn't been announced to the public yet. So, we have to keep mum on where we are. The ongoing EIA will take 1 to 2 years to complete. And after that, it will still require a few more years of land preparation before construction can begin.
We will move into the site. We will progressively shepherd wildlife out of the site. And once they have been moved outside, we can commence clearance of the vegetation as well as the felling of the tree.
They will get an ecologist to conduct a check to make sure the trees within the area, there's no active nests. If there are active nests, they will then need to wait out for the birds to fledge, and after that the trees can be removed.
I'm the chief town planner for HDBs. There are trade-offs between development versus nature. You know, we always say planners are guardians of public interest, but we are also stewards of our natural resources. But if the plan can be synthesized in such a way that you can have the cake and eat it, and you don't compromise on the housing as well, that would be ideal. Right now we are in the midst of Tampines North. Right in the center, you see the Boulevard Park. On both sides, we have close to 4,000 to 5,000 households. We have a beautiful park that connects all the housing together. When you have a park or sizable open space, that is one of the greatest things that can happen to a town. Because we could use the park to precisely structure the town and the patterns of how we're going to develop.
In 2013, Tampines North was one of 3 towns touted as the next generation of public housing, centered around nature and greenery.
For Tampines North, we started off with a vacant piece of land. The use of a major park, sizable park, can indeed fundamentally change the look and feel and experience of this part of the town called Tampines North.
Over the past 3 decades, Singapore's resident population has grown by about 41%. And as of 2024, it hit a high of 4.18 million. In addition to that, there are more singles who want their own homes. This means needing more flats than ever before. And so, given its land constraints, Singapore's land planners have to stretch land options even more.
Down the line, we must be prepared to make big moves in order to create space for Singaporeans to live their dreams. Plans like Paya Lebar Air Base relocation that will free up the Paya Lebar Air Base site for housing, jobs, amenities and green spaces. The Greater Southern Waterfront, for which the Keppel Club site will be launched very shortly to provide housing in a very central part of Singapore. We also have Turf City, when the Turf City operations wind up and we are able to use the site for housing.
In the long term, these moves will add more than 170,000 new homes.
So in Singapore, we embrace what is uniquely a high-density, high-rise model of township planning and development. So in that small space that we have to make sure that we are able to house the growing population over the years and make sure that livability is of the highest level possible.
Ensuring livability doesn't end with the construction of homes.
Today we are at Tampines North Drive 5. We're going to fly the drone over a piece of vacant land. The purpose of this fly is to detect rodent activities as well as our water ponding.
Runner can take off already. Go to the hoardings direct.
While flying, any sign of rodent activities can actually be seen from this screen. So from this red dot, it shows that there is rodent activity.
Okay, you can see here all the red patches are water ponding because just now there's heavy rain.
So water ponding is an issue because it can cause mosquito breeding. So before it causes any mosquito breeding, we clear the ponding and we will eliminate the mosquito breeding. So within these 6 hours, we able to complete a few plots of vacant land.
Surrounding this vacant plot is at least 30 blocks of flats. Deploying the thermal drone helps nip in the bud any problems with rodents and mosquitoes, protecting residents in the area. These drones are part of recent efforts to use technology in tackling everyday issues in public housing.
When we started off in the 60s, 70s, of course, the focus is really more functional. How can we house the growing population in the fastest, shortest time in high-rise living? But over the decades, we've gotten used to high-rise living. And the focus is more to build up the identity of the place. For myself, I joined HDB in the early 90s. So of course then, a large part of the housing backbone has been broken, so-called. Right? So we built towns based on those principles that are timeless, but yet we are searching for higher quality in terms of the way we build it, the way we express it, the way things are enabled by technology, because then the performance of the town is that much higher.
So the public housing story in Singapore is really an integral part of our Singapore story. So the new compact for housing is really about upholding our basics and fundamentals. First, keep housing affordable for Singaporeans. Public housing must always remain affordable for every generation to own their own homes. Second, we want housing estates to be areas where Singaporeans of different backgrounds can come together, live together, grow up together, and forge that sense of common experiences and memories together. And thirdly, it has to be a fair system for everyone, so that people don't feel like, this is a system where only the lucky few benefit. So these are three important founding principles that we started HDB on, and we will continue to uphold, so that every generation in Singapore can aspire towards having their own home, building that sense of community, and having a stake in our nation.